When we first started doing this study, if you were to add up all of the small businesses, Joe, they would be giving more than large business.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're talking, 20 years ago. Now, the large businesses, CSR is something, and ESG, all of those little acronyms have really reached the boardroom. And so part of the strategy and the ethos of a good business, a particularly large business, is that they will actually be involved in giving in a big way.
This episode is part 2 of our discussion with Dr Wendy Scaife. Wendy is an Associate Professor and Director at the Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Studies at the Queensland University of Technology. She's been involved in the not-for-profit and philanthropy sector for more than 3 decades. In this episode, we further delved into the business of giving, the importance of authentic partnerships between businesses and charities, and giving after death. If you haven't already listened to part 1, I encourage you to do so on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts.
We see this in workplace giving, by the way. In our studies, we found that more than 50% of companies actually match their employees' workplace giving.
That's awesome. And I think that leads us nicely into the kind of next phase of what I wanted to talk to you about, which is really around business giving and, this idea that, many of the listeners of this podcast are business owners themselves and, want to know a little bit about how you define what business giving is, and we'll move on from there.
Sure. So I guess it depends on size of business for a start. So when we do studies, we'll look at the larger businesses and we'll look at, the small and medium enterprises. And sole traders are another type of business that certainly is involved in giving. And I guess most of the giving, when we first started doing this study, if you were to add up all of the small businesses, Joe, they would be giving more than large business. But, we're talking, 20 years ago. Now, the large businesses, CSR is something, and ESG, all of those little acronyms have really reached the boardroom. And so part of the strategy and the ethos of a good business, a particularly large business, is that they will actually be involved in giving in a big way. So it
seems to me, it seems to me, Wendy, that like in the past, businesses and companies were all about maximizing their profits for shareholders as the main means for economic success. But I think that's much broader with the modern business. To take on the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. And to what extent does business giving,
so in our Giving Australia study, which was a large household study, we found that there was a total of $17.5 billion in giving, which is pretty, that's pretty stellar. And business is, they say, on the cusp of overtaking individual giving in this country. So that means that there's a lot more businesses doing a lot more. Some of that, as I said, might be counting their employees' money as well through the workplace giving that's done. But businesses being that collective, the collaboration that people are joining together, as we talked about with giving circles, joining together to achieve some things in the community. So business giving involves, as well as dollars, the growth area, Joe, is community business partnerships. So this is such a difference. When I first got involved in this area, and I actually did my master's research, as I said, in how companies can improve what they do in their community connections and community sponsorships and partnerships. In those days, typically companies would write, $100, $300 checks, and scattergun approach, standard thing, really easy, no brains behind it, no strategy.
No thought, Yep.
And that has so changed now. The smart money goes into partnerships where people figure out where's your synergy of interest. So it might be, if you're Lifeline, it might be Optus. You can see that there's some logic and reason for those two groups to be involved together. And people really respond to that. They are looking for that kind of link to be able to see that, yeah, this is an authentic partnership. There is a reason for these groups to work together. And so we in the old days would see sponsorship as a very common thing. And we're seeing less and less of that. Sponsorship being where, the sponsor, the company, wants far more than their sponsored dollar in return on investment in terms of profile or new business or whatever it might be. But of course, the business partnerships are about mutual benefit.
Are these business partnerships effectively for mostly SMEs or corporations, large corporations? Which one would you say?
Yeah, look, they operate across the gamut.
Okay.
In terms of size, but you would see the most prominent ones at the large end of town. So I was involved in one of the early ones, and that was between the Leukemia Foundation and AMP as a company. And that's probably a good example of the range of activities. So for there we had the workplace giving, but also we had Shave for a Cure and a heap of people within AMP Shaved for a Cure. AMP opened the way to their advertising people to help us get the message out about leukemia. So they asked us if some of the younger patients might like to design their Christmas card. And so the message went out about that to the point where people would actually walk into AMP offices with checks for the Leukemia Foundation. So that was, where you actually see that there's a company that's obviously doing some good things for a charity, and then it's recognised for having done that. You can have some cynical kind of partnerships where I think that it's more one-sided and the benefits going more to the company. But if there's a genuine and planned approach to meet the needs of the charity in ways that work for the company in terms of its corporate citizenship, then I think that authenticity carries weight.
What do you think the benefits are to SMEs, small business, family business,
Sure.
in engaging in a structured giving approach?
Sure. So I think that any kind of structured giving, or when we're talking about corporate partnerships, will in fact help focus what that company stands for, that SME and that family stands for. There's a lot of thought that goes into, as we were talking about, which cause, because there's 50,000 charities, economically significant charities across Australia. So there is that designing and dredging into values. And sometimes if we don't reflect on these things, it all passes us by. But if you have that process of actually having to figure out what it is that you want to achieve and through what kind of means and in what kind of ways, as we were saying, is it something that you're going to go hard and give a lot and have a big impact and then move out? Or are you going to set up something that has perpetuity? And both have, of course, good validity. And so as a small organisation, there's of course that ethos of the family comes through very strongly. And it might be that the small organisation, small business has operated with a certain ethos and set of values in its business life. And that's been, something that people recognise it for. It's part of its brand. And that's just the strength of the individuals who have set up that work and have operated it in a certain way, with a particular integrity or whatever it is that that organisation values. And then to formalise that and extend that and reinforce that and take that message up more in some form of structured giving, I think is a very powerful and logical way for small business to get involved in structured giving. We talked about structured giving being helpful with families, but also the other things that people say to us, Jo, is that they think their giving decisions are a lot better because it's not just someone writing a check. It's a group of people assessing and thinking and maybe going and exploring and talking to others. And so the quality of the giving is probably higher when you structure the giving. the interesting thing that we found in Giving Australia as well, and this is not necessarily at the top end of giving, but for everyday people, if you are a structured giver, a planned giver, rather than a spontaneous giver, you actually give 6 times as much. So let me tell you just briefly about that. So that example where we're talking about the family figuring out what they're going to give to, they might just decide, gosh, we'd really like to give to this, but I can see on their website, if we added another little bit to that, we would actually, as a family, fund this. But also, it is kind of like that regular, small habit of giving over time, rather than spontaneously dashing off a check at tax time. So people get more invested. They know and they own, these charities are not owned by the staff or the volunteers. They're owned by all of the people who support that charity, So the charity is a wonderful part of us all. I think we're involved in it.
Do you think, Wendy, as you were talking and I was thinking about small business and, even if they had the inclination or the want to actually start engaging, where do they even start? I mean, it seems like I almost felt like there was a need for some sort of form of consultant to come out to a business and say, well, what are your values? What do you stand for? Here are the panel of, that sort of thing.
And there are consultancies who actually do that. And there are consultancies who will actually be a matching agent between good charities and good companies. And there are processes that they would suggest. So, for instance, as a starting point, they might suggest just a survey of the staff, the family, people associated with the business to figure out what would they really see as important for the business to be supporting. Certainly, this is what AMP did, for instance, with help from a consultant, and they narrowed it down to 3 particular areas. And then the consultant went and found charities that were national at that stage to be able to, who might fit the bill. And they wrote off to them and they just asked for an annual report. And, I think they ended up writing off to 60 and they got 15 annual reports, which gives you some idea that, sometimes the follow through is not there. But that was important for businesses because they wanted to be linking with business-like charities, that deliver on what they say. And so yes, there's a process that's usually quite an inclusive process to try and determine the areas. And it might be that there are examples, there's lots of examples of business community partnerships. There's lots of ways to have a look at what's working well for others. People might just talk with other businesses about what has worked well. So, you can formalize through a consultant or you can talk with others. You could do lots on the net. There's any amount of cases and examples of what's worked well. And particularly if you're from one particular area or industry, to see what's been done internationally, who they've linked with. Certainly, there are some partnerships that operate internationally and are very powerful as a result of the fact that it's an international commitment to that particular cause.
In practical terms, what do you see SMEs doing in their giving? Is there a percentage of sort of gross revenue? Is it sort of like what are the sort of ways in which businesses give financially? Is it a commitment that is externalized on websites? Is it internal? Or is it just so many different things? I'm sure.
Sure. So there's many. I guess it's important for a business to have a bit of a think and a strategy in terms of what it is that they're seeking from this. So I would urge, of course, towards the authentic. If you're not seeking to help the community as your primary goal, then, if you're just going to be writing to a charity, as many of them used to do when these partnerships started to emerge, by close of business Friday, tell me what kind of profile and return on investment you can give me if I give you this amount of money. Seriously, you would get you would get a brief like that.
Yeah.
And, and that's not a good start.
No.
Being able to co-design some goals is a really important thing, but both parties need to know what it is that they're seeking to kind of figure out, well, where's the sweet spot here?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that we're trying to do that you might be able to help with? Remembering that very often in-kind giving or corporate volunteering or small business volunteering is just gold to charities. For instance, I had in my Leukemia Foundation days, a group of people were trying to create a tissue bank. So in other words, tissues of people who'd had leukemia, because there's so many different types and it's one of the smaller cancers. They didn't have enough tissues in the one place to be able to study them scientifically, and they wanted to be able to fly them in. And so they said, this would cost 80,000. Can you help us find 80,000? And of course, what we said is, we don't really need 80,000. What you need is a freight company. And so, so there's so much and so many different ways that that organisations can give. There's some beautiful pro bono volunteering that goes on, and it's immense. People who've got skills in strategy, or companies that do a little bit of training for their staff, and they invite some of the local charities in because all they're doing is running the same program, but opening up a few extra chairs for people who can benefit from whatever it might be, cybersecurity or databases or whatever. There are wonderful ways that companies loan their expertise. So it might be that some of their team might go on the board or might go on a committee, or might go in and do a particular facilitation of strategic planning, or depending on what their expertise or their in-kind ability to give is.
I'm really pleased.
Wide.
I'm really pleased, Wendy, that you talked about giving in the sense of personal exertion and expertise, a transfer of expertise, because it's not just about financially supporting something and closing your eyes. It can also be. You don't necessarily have to financially provide and close your eyes, but there are instances where it can be that way. So I think actually being involved in charities and from a personal exertion point of view is a way to really engage, right?
Yeah, look, it's just such a valuable thing from both points of view, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
The large consultancies, for instance, just use this as a wonderful way to train their staff. So they're up and coming new leaders in the organisation, because again, they might not have had time to be involved in these kinds of things, but they take on a board responsibility, or they go in with a brief to solve a particular business problem that the charity is having, or a growth problem the charity is having. And it's amazing how that engages people, and they get the issue and they want to do more. Once they see what their skills can do, then they, particularly the young people, they'll start to run the cocktail party or the event at their workplace, get them onto the workplace giving list, all of those things. So there's immense amounts of involvement from business. Business very often has a bad name, and I'm sure sometimes it's deserved. Royal Commissions would tell us it's definitely deserved at times. But by and large, businesses are made up of people, and by and large, people care. And so what happens is charities give a structure for what's inside of us, all of that caring that we would like to put into something that's wider and bigger than ourselves and our own lives.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it drives me to the next question, which is really around higher levels of morale and employee engagement when these sort of initiatives are undertaken. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there would be study after study after study that would verify this. And particularly for those younger generations, millennials and younger, it's almost a requirement now. And it is something that is definitely asked at the job interview stage. What does this company do in the community? What can I get involved in that's beyond the workplace here? What does the company stand for? And people will walk away if they haven't got the answers that they want. So also when you're trying to recruit the best and brightest, that's an important tool that you actually have that attractant of a company that has a soul, I suppose. So yes, we do see that more and more.
What roadblocks or impediments do you see with an owner wanting to actually think seriously about business giving? Like, what are the sort of roadblocks or impediments that might be in the way of
Sure.
getting there?
Yeah. Okay. So I think sometimes the impediments are in our own mind.
Yep.
I have to say that there is a myth, we call it the overhead myth. There is a myth that charities spend a lot that they don't need to on delivering to the cause, on delivering to the beneficiaries. I would defy most businesses to operate on the margins that charities operate on and still do good. Bearing in mind that charities can't pay large salaries, they're not necessarily attracting, the greatest young graduates or whatever. They have magnificent people of passion and huge ability in a lot of cases, and huge loyalty to that organisation. So they've developed that ability and knowledge over a long period of time. So when I expect a charity to be careful with its money. I expect it also to be innovative with its money. I expect it to invest, to grow. And I think good business people understand this, that you have to spend money to make money and to do big things. So I guess that there's that impediment that I like to raise, because people, it seems to be like a habit that we have, that we say, oh, but they spend too much on admin, well, where are they supposed to operate from? In the car park, with an abacus. So yeah, the reality there. Impediments as well, I think, are that people, as you were saying, they don't know where to start. And our research would tell us that people start logically and small. So people will test out an organisation by making a modest, middle of the road donation and see how they're treated, see what information they get about the organisation. But if you have a sense of where you would like to go, most organisations would be only too pleased to have you chat with them about what they've got going on. Where maybe they're trying to create a new facility for kids with an intellectual disability who are not vocal, but do have feelings and do make friendships, those kinds of things. Letting people, going on a tour, very often there might be a tour of what the organisation is doing, or an open day. And so being able to just get a sense of what charities do. But most charities would be only too willing to take you on a journey of what they actually do. Of course, online there's any amount of, and everybody, all of our research will tell us that charities should pay a lot of attention to their websites, because we really, and particularly the younger the generation, the more they're interrogating the website to find out what it is that they want to know about, where they can see themselves fitting into what that charity is doing, and what's the bona fides of that organisation. Where's the impact study? Where's the research and the evidence that says, yes, this is a need, and what we're doing actually is filling it the right way. So we're getting tougher as consumers of charity.
Well, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about more around the legacy side of things, and how families can use the estate planning mechanism to actually, make impact. And let's start with the question of how prevalent in society it is for a family to gift through mechanisms such as a will.
Sure. So a will being an individual's instrument, of course.
Yeah.
So I would say not prevalent enough.
Yeah.
But strangely enough, across the world, Australia is not too different to other countries, Joe. So we, in our Giving Australia study, found that just under half of Australians actually had a will, and of those, 7.4% had included a gift to a charity in that will. So the interesting thing is that this is expected to double by 2040. So the amounts are expected to double by 2040 because of the intergenerational wealth transfer. Because, as everybody reads in the news that we're dying with still 80% of our superannuation untouched, and that's going down to the next generations who
But it's not because there is a higher level of participation in estate planning instruments, it is seemingly just an increase of funding. So I would have thought that one of the impediments that seems quite obvious here is that people aren't engaging with their plans post their death. You immediately remedy that issue, and I think you increase the amount that is paid out to charities.
Joe, the planner in this is critical.
Yep.
There's been some really interesting studies in the UK, the nudge studies, where the role of the financial or estate advisor has really come to the fore. And so they had a control group, and they have the scenario where that planner is going through the processes and actually says to the person, would you like to include a charity in your will? And 3 times as many people included a charity in their will because they said, hey, I'd love to do that. What a nice idea. I'm so pleased you mentioned that. And when they actually said to them, have you got a particular charity you've supported or two during your lifetime? Would you like to include that cause in your will? 4 times as many people included that cause in their will. So we know that it's something people are so happy to do, but they don't think about it. So that planner approach is tremendously important, Joe.
Do you think that the level of participation through the estate mechanism increases as the wealth grows? So
yeah. So in our studies, income wasn't a factor. You couldn't track income. However, when we talk with philanthropists and do smaller scale studies of philanthropists, you do see a higher likelihood, obviously, of a will, but also a higher likelihood of a gift in the will. So it's a double-edged sword there. If you go to households and just go on income, it's not necessarily going to be a higher percentage of people giving a gift to a charity in their will, but those who have got a higher net worth typically have in our smaller studies are more likely to have included a charity in the will. So that's a little bit sort of counterintuitive, but it's a difference between a household study and a study of philanthropists. So if you're a philanthropist, you're already attuned to charity, and yep, you're going to continue that after your lifetime. And it's such a powerful thing to do, and it's such an easy thing to do, Joe. I think that people don't quite realise that, you can gift shares, you can gift that, extra property that you don't think your kids are going to need. You can give jewellery. In my days at the Leukemia Foundation, Joe, the mail would come in from the country, and one day I opened a box and it had cotton wool in it, and this is before anthrax, and you open it, it, and there was the most beautiful opals there. That someone had passed away, and the wish was that the lovely valuable opals, when we were given a lamb at one stage, So, and it's also for many people, it's the biggest gift that they will ever make, and it means a lot. But it's important that you know that the charity really needs that beyond your lifetime, and that there are there's an integrity, a promise to donors in place, a good governance that ensures that your dollars will go to where you want it to go.
Do you typically find that the actual gifts themselves are given in a capital lump sum, or are they given in a way that actually creates an ongoing level of accountability post, the family's passing?
Well, I guess that it's like anything. You can set up any kind of accountability that you wish. You can put anything in your will that you wish. Typically, there is not that. I have not seen a lot of that accountability set in place. A smart charity, of course, is going to keep on telling people, the next generation, what a difference this has made, and engage them and thank them, because that's only just courtesy and right. But in the States, you will see that, there are cases where decades down the track, a building that has been funded from a person's estate it's going to be used for a different purpose or taken down, and the family are not happy. And it becomes a legal situation in the States. It is less legalistic here, but it's still I think it's very important that it's going to a charity where you have a good governance, a good track record, and where people actually talk about what happens with bequests. Very often, the best thing that you could do for a charity is to give it some untied funding, and very often the mechanism might be a percentage of the residual estate, and that's good because, of course, if you put in that you're going to give 20,000 now, when you die, that 20,000 might not be worth very much, and that's not your intent. That's not what you wanted.
Is there a worry with families that perhaps because there are things like testator's family maintenance proceedings contesting the will, that it might be more beneficial or fruitful to lean towards gifting while we're alive?
Sure.
Is
Joe,
that part of it?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut across you, Joe.
No, you go for it.
So certainly our research would show that Australia has been one of the most litigious where there's been a family questioning a gift to a charity. And because, of course, the costs come out of the estate, there's no skin off their nose to launch something, even if they don't think they're going to be very successful in that. And in the past, charities would say, this is, something that we don't want to get involved in. Our good name should not be involved in, a fight between ourselves and a family member. But increasingly, charities, particularly if there's more than one charity involved, will actually contest that, particularly if they have records, if they have a true sense of honouring and knowing what that person wanted. But we did a study that showed that even if the most heinous things had been done by that child to the person with the estate, the money still went to the child who might have, been involved in domestic violence against them, whatever. So the pendulum had swung too far, I think, in the courts towards children, and we're not talking about children who need, who are in desperate straits or anything like that. It was just the money went away from the community and from the intent of the person leaving the money.
When it comes to estates and being able to help and assist families, do you have any advice or feedback to professional advisors on how they may be able to structure up to better assist?
Again, I think that it's really important that they are able to give people a choice and alert people to this opportunity, but there are books that will have background on different types of charities that people can flick through. It might be that depending on the amount, you might engage them with trying to to be involved with that charity. In our studies, we found that people who had made a bequest to a charity were absolutely highly engaged in everything that charity did because they were investing in it. They were investors. And so they also were more likely to give twice as much to that charity during their lifetime than the average donor. So they had made that commitment and they had voted with their feet and they were voting with their lifetime dollars as well. So I think that that kind of sense of engagement, about 50% of people, we estimate, don't want to let the charity know in any way that they have bequested. And you can understand this. We probed this with people and they just didn't want to let them down. And they also didn't want to be treated differently by the charity. By the same token, there's a logic to letting the charity know that you love them so much that you're going to be continuing your support, beyond your lifetime. Because they'll want to celebrate that. They'll want to engage you in what's going on in the charity as one of the, the key and prime advocates of what that charity stands for. And they'll want to appreciate you and they'll want to appreciate your family as well and see how, as you were saying before, you might continue to involve the family because it's not a case of a gift being given. It might be a one-off, but that gift is more than a one-off. It's a large legacy, and what they've done in that space is you don't just go, Wham bam, thank you, ma'am. That's a great. We'll build this and move on. That's not how charities operate. It's relational and should be.
So just rounding out, Wendy, what keeps you up at night at the moment, and what's still to do in research, in your research?
Sure. Okay. What keeps me up at night is trying to figure out how we can use more research and different minds to be able to solve some of the wicked problems that are out there that are perennially on the agenda and don't seem to be getting better. Whether we're talking about things in the Indigenous space, or whether we're talking about domestic violence, whether we're talking about climate, there are huge issues. And I'm a great believer in evidence and thinking and involvement to get things solved. I think it takes a movement, but it takes an informed movement. And so I guess for us, that's led us to be involved with QUT's Centre for Future Enterprise, where we are trying to envision and test future enterprises. And we try to work with people with different disciplines to ours. So we're from psychology, sociology, etc., but talking with people who might be from information systems or cybersecurity, or just so many different ways of thinking and bands of knowledge that we want to bring in to be able to take that kind of research to the nonprofit sector, so that it thinks differently. And we need a quantum leap change. You're not going to get that by doing the same old, same old. So that's that sort of keeps me awake at night.
Yeah.
I guess like everybody, there's things I would change in the world. There's, you see the abduction of a child and the focus on that child, and then you think, well, how many children are suffering in that way behind the scenes, in so many different ways behind the scenes, and so I just think those things should keep us awake, and we should think about, well, what can I do? We shouldn't let it kind of overwhelm us and think, well, my little bit won't make a difference. My belief is that, if you pick up a starfish that's been beached and be able to throw that one back in, you make a difference to that one. And if you can pick up a few, fantastic, and if you can be an example for others to do that, then you can leverage and grow what's going on.
Well,
but yeah, that's and apart from that, I'm kept awake at night because I've always been a bad sleeper. It's not always about worrying.
It's a thing. It's a thing. Look, I was just reflecting, and I think I'm immensely thankful to you for doing this. I did talk to you about maybe doing a 2-part series, but I actually feel that this could have been 10. I've got so many more questions, and I just think the contribution that you're making to our small little community is enormous, and I've certainly learnt a lot. My brain has expanded, and I definitely appreciate you coming on. But I do have one last question, and it's one that I ask of every guest. What spirit animal would you be if you were a spirit animal, and why?
Sorry, what
spirit animal would you be if you were?
Okay, so what sort of animal would I be?
Yeah.
If I came back?
Yeah.
If I was reincarnated? Oh, okay. That is a really interesting question. I hope what jumps into my mind, of course, is always the right answer, isn't it? And I'm seeing a horse. I love freedom. I love ranging free, and I love that sense of wind, wind in the hair.
Yep.
I also like that horses, they're sufficient unto themselves, but they can also be of great service. And do great things, and they can run wild and free, or they can just graze. I love that whole sense of freedom from a horse. Yeah.
There was no prompting there, so that was a great answer under pressure. Thanks. So thanks again, Wendy. Appreciate your time, and hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you, Joe. Can I just thank you for what you do? Because our research would tell us the Joes of this world out there, prompting people to think about what's meaningful in their life, and having money, but using that money for all sorts of purposes. It's a really important factor in people thinking differently about their own lives and acting differently in their community. So thank you for what you do, Joe.
Appreciate that, Wendy.
I hope that this one was enjoyable to listen to and there were some moments of value. If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.